Welcome to the Gus Alva Perspective, a video cast that helps remind us all about the need for a mindset of abundance and gratitude as opposed to a mindset of scarcity and fear. There's several different ways in which we can approach different things, and today's video cast is a particularly sobering one for me. Today is the 3rd of February, 2023, so 2/3/23. And it's a particularly poignant day for me. Yesterday, there was an incident that occurred very close to where I live. Dana Point is an idyllic setting. It's a city that's right next to the beach, and the Pacific Coast Highway stretches through that particular city. Well, yesterday, an emergency room physician was riding his bicycle. He was exercising, and he was hit by a motorist. So this individual in his car came speeding through and literally took this ER dog out. The individual went flying, landed, hit the ground, and to add insult to injury, the motorist stopped his car, got out of the car, and then stabbed the doctor to death. A blatant act of murder in open, broad daylight. A very sobering situation and a very scary situation for all of us to face in a community, in the world, in any setting. So as you hear this story, you're probably thinking in your mind's eye, oh my gosh, this is something that causes rage inside of me. And it's interesting to note that, people do experience road rage, people do experience different emotions, but nothing excuses a heinous act like killing an individual, murdering someone, taking another person's life. Now, the reason that I wanted to share this story with you is not just that here's an individual that's given his life to help serve others as an emergency room doctor. Here's somebody that's been trying to take care of himself by exercising on a regular basis. He's observing the law. He is, waiting at a traffic light before he'll actually take off, and then somebody comes barreling behind, takes him out, and then subsequently, goes on to take the additional steps to end his life. It's almost ironic that this doctor was literally a mile away from the very hospital in which he served as an ER doctor. Now, the reason that I'm sharing this with you is that I've got a little story of my own also, and it's an interesting one. You note this helmet is pretty badly cracked and pretty badly scraped. And about 3 years ago, my life could have ended in a very similar situation. A friend of mine had invited me to train with him to do an Ironman event. We were going to be doing the Santa Rosa Ironman. And to be able to get in condition to be able to accomplish such a feat, keep in mind, you obviously have to swim 2.5 miles, then cycle 133 miles, and then run a full marathon, 26.2 miles. You can't just roll out of bed one day and accomplish a task like that. You have to train for it, and you have to do the appropriate steps to be able to accomplish that. So in the context of that training, we were doing 50-mile loops a couple of times a week. And to be able to do that and get to work, we had to leave at like 4 a.m. so as to be able to, do a 50-mile loop, get back home by 7 o'clock, and then take a shower and then, go either to the clinic or the hospital and take care of patients. In so doing, however, the folly was that the streets were very dark, and we were utilizing headlights to be able to illuminate the path through which we would be going. And I unfortunately, in one of those outings, was also hit by a car. I ended up sustaining a fractured clavicle, 6 broken ribs, a collapsed lung and a broken hand. And even now, the sequela, the leftover residual damage from that is that now I have to literally utilize a stand-up desk because my back will spasm if I'm sitting, over an extended time period. So there was a consequence to that, but it led towards this perspective of living in fear. And let me share what that exactly means. A fair amount of my colleagues, once they found out what had transpired, obviously, I was in the hospital a sufficient amount of time so as to allow the chest tube to allow my lung to, basically pop back into shape so that I could breathe appropriately, have the chest tube removed, and obviously have a plate placed on my clavicle so as to stabilize the bone there. I didn't want to stay in the hospital longer than I needed to, knowing the fact that hospitals are just that, right? You only stay in the hospital for as long as you need to be there, and then you're out of there. But the important thing was that, the healing process out of that was an interesting one. Physically, you're left with some scars, and mentally, you're also left with scars. And those scars can be highly disabling. You can either opt to never approximate something that would have led you into an instance like that, or you can embrace that and take a look at that very incident as an experience to draw from and learn more about yourself and do more. But the two choices are this: you can either live in fear or you can accept the fact that, so long as we live, we have different types of situations that could take our life experience away. And it's really important being able to commune with those thoughts and to be able to move forward. A lot of my colleagues immediately stated, "You'll never cycle again, will you?" And it made me think back of my approach with my own children. Having four daughters and one son, my constant litany was, if you fall off the bike, you got to get back on it. And you can't live life scared. And now I was being thrust and faced with a very similar situation, a much more serious situation. My life could have ended that morning. In fact, after having collapsed lung, as a doctor, you always think the absolute worst first, right? And I immediately thought that I was in a situation in which there was fluid that was collecting around my heart, like the pericardial sac. And if that happens, your heart doesn't have room in which for it to beat anymore. And so my buddy that I was riding with, I recall just coming to after having sustained the injury, for which, by the way, I don't have any recollection. And that's not an uncommon thing. Whenever you've got a serious head injury, it's pretty impossible to remember exactly what was happening right before, right after. But I do recall coming to and literally telling him I can't breathe and I think I'm going into cardiac tamponade, very serious medical issue. And I remember saying, I probably have a couple of minutes to live, get help, please. And then subsequently coming to again in the emergency room when I was hearing the emergency room physician saying that he was about to stick in a chest tube and thinking, well, I would rather be on the giving than the receiving end, but if it's meant to be, let's get this done. And then subsequently passing out again and then being in my hospital room. So the interesting thing is, we all have necessities. We all have needs. My instance of, again, experiencing such trauma had a good outcome. This young physician here in Laguna Beach, Dr. Momoni, had a tragic outcome. His family is obviously in deep hurt over what transpired. And there are many shocking things. There's many reverberations that pop through with the very incident that transpired. In my instance, as I think about what was going on, I recall the very first time going out on a bicycle and thinking, what do the white bicycles on the road indicate? And having a friend of mine telling me, those are ghost bikes, and ghost bikes basically are an acknowledgement that somebody was fatally hit at that particular spot. And I remember thinking, wow, that's not a good thing. And I certainly don't want to experience an accident while out on the road. I recall also that unless you've been a cyclist, you really don't necessarily have a lot of patience for people that are on bicycles. And sometimes people are downright mean. And because they see someone that's exercising, they don't have that opportunity to be able to do that endeavor or simply don't want to do it, will actually get close to the cyclist or, you know, create some type of discourtesy so that the cyclist is discomfited or, frightened over potentially being hit. And when you're out on the road on a bicycle, you're pretty vulnerable. There's no competition between a car and a bicycle. So the outcome's pretty much assured if someone gets a bit too close to a cyclist. That's the first thing. It's really important that we have the civility with one another to, you know, be proactive about procuring for our fellow person and skirting somebody that is exposed like that. After all, they're trying to improve their overall lives through exercise and they're trying to be as healthy as possible. And malice shouldn't necessarily be extended in that manner. That's one thing. You know, the second thing is, after sustaining an injury like this, this is part of the reason by which I always advocate to people, if you're doing any type of sport in which head injury might come about, wear a helmet. Whether that be being on a bicycle, being on a skateboard, skiing, snowboarding, whatever it is, don't try to look cool. Just wear a helmet, please. It can save your life. As a doctor, I have that pressing need always to encourage individuals. Obviously, that spills over with my children, but certainly spills over with my patients and with friends and colleagues. I will never, mince words along the lines of the need for that. But in addition to that, the need to not live life scared. I recall several noted colleagues literally saying, well, you'd have to be crazy to get back on a bike. There's no way you're going to be doing that again. Your wife's not going to allow you to do that again, is she? And I'll be candid. My wife was not keen on me hopping back on the bike, but I also could not face the hypocrisy of having encouraged my children that if they fell, that they should lose the fear of hopping back on a bike. And the interesting thing was that for me, I did not want to live life in that manner. When you're constrained, when you're tethered back, when you've got to apply the brakes on a constant basis, you cannot have the authenticity to live the life that should be lived in a full manner. Obviously, chasing reckless things and doing foolish things and having a disregard of one's health is obviously not a good thing. But in this case, when you take as many precautions as possible to follow through with a given exercise, I think that's a noble thing. The incidents, however, that transpired yesterday here are very sobering because this appears to have been a very intentional situation where somebody either was, just not having a great day or there was some sort of malintent, and some people just don't necessarily have that desire to be proactive about caring for one's fellow individuals. Whatever the context is, a terrible tragedy occurred, a very sobering one, and one in which we're reminded of the fact that instead of having that generosity of heart and spirit that we should be having with one another as brethren, we oftentimes are led by our own desires and needs, not taking into consideration other people's health and safety in mind. The important thing, however, is just this: living in fear, despite the fact that we hear about horrendous incidents, is certainly not an advantageous way of living life. Having coursed with COVID and this pandemic over the past few years has led a lot of individuals to have this fear concept. And individuals who previously were anxious to begin with now have ready reasons by which to continue to be fettered and enclosed and not socializing and worsening their overall outcomes. The important point here is that we have options, we have choices. Our mindset will dictate how we approach different things, and living life in fear is certainly not uh, a life that would be worthwhile living fully. The important thing is we have the power and the opportunities to be able to be appropriate advocates, not just to other people that want to emulate what we do, but also to ourselves, to our genuine selves. Some musings right now, based on a very sobering situation that just transpired in our community here, and one that resonates very closely to home, having lived a very similar circumstance. Um, I can readily tell you that this video cast is so critical because through it, we have an opportunity of dispelling myths, and by testing out different theorems together, I think that we will have a more productive interaction amongst one another. Living a life that is filled with gratitude, being disciples of discipline, can keep us on track with the purpose that we have before us. I thank you for spending time with me on the Gus Alva Perspective. Thank you.